Okay, I think we are ready to get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joshua Kearney, and I am the Social Media Committee Chair for CBDNA, and I also serve as the Assistant Director of Bands at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first session of the inaugural CBDNA webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled Impact and Activism, Multimedia and the Wind Band. I'm very excited to welcome today's presenters. You're in for a real treat. They are internationally renowned composer Alex Shapiro, Dr. Gerard Morris, Director of Bands and Interim Director of the School of Music at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, and Dr. Robert Taylor, Director of Bands and Chair of the Wind, Brass, and Percussion Division at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. We also have a special guest with us. It's very late at night there, but composer Stephen Bryant, who will have a work discussed during today's presentation. A few matters of housekeeping. Please keep your microphone muted throughout the webinar. If you have questions throughout the event, please type them in the chat window. Our presenters have reserved time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. Quick note and disclaimer about the chat. The private chat has been disabled. So anything you type in the chat box will be visible to everyone. This session is being recorded as well, and the video will be archived on the CBDNA YouTube channel. I will place the link to the YouTube channel in the chat window. Now, without further ado, please welcome today's presenters, Alex Shapiro, Dr. Gerard Morris, and Dr. Robert Taylor.
Yay! Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is great. It's not quite like being able to, have beverages together in person in Tacoma as we were supposed to do, but it's the next best thing. And I really want to thank Josh so much for helping set us up here. And he's just been really great through this whole process of launching this part of CBDNA's online series. And as he was joking with us before, we're kind of the guinea pigs because it's the first one. Everybody that follows us is a higher species like, ferret, but we're the guinea pigs, so bear with us. And that starts with right now when I'm going to share my screen and walk you through a whole PowerPoint kind of presentation over which I'll be talking, and Rob and Gerard and hopefully Stephen. He's in Austria. If he can stay awake long enough, we'll talk fast. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me as I try to get all of this set up the way it worked so well in rehearsal. Let's see what happens. I think that's working. How does that look, Josh?
Looks good.
Good. Okay. I need feedback because I can't see you guys very well. All right. So, as Josh said, this is Impact and Activism. Da-da-da! Multimedia and the wind band world. Woohoo! So, we're going to be talking about electroacoustic music today, and advocacy and concerts, whether they are live or online. It's all good. And let's see if I can get this to, there we go. So from minstrels to symphonic composers, from folk musicians to punk rockers, and countless composers and songwriters have all written anthems for social and environmental causes. And we're not going to delve into any of that history today, but we are going to take you on a really cool tour of the things that we can all do to connect our musical lives with the rest of people's lives. And I'm trying to get this to click. I don't know why it's not advancing. Bear with me. There we go. It seems to want, it's like my cat. It wants to get pet in a certain place. Okay, so there are many ways to engage students and audiences and get them thinking about social and environmental topics. And educators and composers can demonstrate the seamless connection between music and the world around us by using relevant musical works to open conversation with students about timely issues. The topics don't have to be controversial, and I say this in particular for any of you who are teaching middle school or high school where parents are involved, and there's all kinds of other stuff, right, that you have to take into consideration. So, in the rehearsal room, the works composed with consciousness raising can offer really powerful and non-divisive ways to discuss relevant topics. And in performance, the pairing of music and visuals helps these messages reach the hearts of our audiences. And the students on stage are the future stewards of our planet. And music can heighten awareness and begin conversations that can ultimately affect change one household at a time. And for today's discussion, I've chosen examples which, in my opinion, are neither political nor religious, and I certainly don't think they should be viewed as such. They address our physical environment or point to human rights, such as education, health, and protections from abuse, none of which should be polarizing. And other important topics could include, as you see here, gender and racial equity, neglect of elderly people, autism, famine, climate change, pollution, animal rights, volunteerism, and a whole lot more. I really am one of these people that welcomes as broad a discussion with musicians and audiences as we can possibly have. Having said that, artists don't have to be activists, right? And a piece of music doesn't have to have a message. Some composers prefer that their notes speak for themselves and without any kind of additional reference. Other composers, like me, seek opportunities to express their views in tandem with their art, and both approaches are equally valid. In my own catalog, this is just a portion. I've got almost 20 band pieces at this point, and I just pulled out a few of them just to point out that music can be optional. You can choose a piece of music and not attach a message to it, or you can choose to attach that message to it. It's music, right? It doesn't inherently, if it doesn't have lyrics, if it's not something absolutely obvious, it doesn't inherently have to have a message. But these are examples, some of which you'll see snippets of today or hear about. Like Moment it invites reflection on the negative effects of pollution and all the deleterious things we're doing to the planet. Or it could just be a beautiful, pensive piece of music, right? It doesn't matter. So it's up to us how we want to present. It's become the norm for composers to be invited to the lip of the stage to introduce our pieces to the audience. And some composers are more comfortable speaking publicly than others, right? We've all witnessed that. And I always feel sorry for them, the ones who are not comfortable doing it. My heart goes out to them. Not everybody is well suited to that. And for those of us who do enjoy the opportunity, I've always seen it that the lip of the stage is a powerful bully pulpit from which we can talk about the meaning of our piece and the larger issue associated with it, if we are going in that direction. We have a lot of power from that exposure. Webhearsals are another way of expressing ourselves. The composer can be an effective coach and an inspiration to the musicians online, and setting up a webhearsal is a really invaluable and unique experience for the ensemble. A lot of you know this. Social emotional learning, SEL, which a lot of you are familiar with, is a natural outcome of these online sessions and this kind of connectivity. So what's lacking in sound quality over the intertubes is more than made up for in the human connection. And the guest is interacting directly with the students as they ask questions or share their ideas, and later when the composer speaks to the audience, or either live or on a pre-recorded video, this full circle of connectivity. So plugging in technology, which you see in the foreground, connects us to reality, which you see in this case the Salish Sea in the background there. And my goal is to create an oral experience that compels the musicians and their audiences and, when appropriate, can bring important topics to the fore. So this is where I'm sitting right now as I speak to you. And just to give you a quick thumbnail, I love, and I think Stephen too, I can speak for him a little bit on this, seamlessly melding the sound from musicians with that of textures and frequencies that I create that are unlike anything that the instruments could sound like, which is why I'm using the electronics. The live and the recorded elements are equal partners in the piece and composed at the same time as the instrumental parts. Best of all, I can easily incorporate sounds from nature or objects or other things, samples, that can convey a particular message. And each of the brief excerpts you're going to hear today, it happens to be electroacoustic. So the first topic is, and it's the overriding one for today's talk, is environmental awareness. And my music should stand on its own without visuals and without any agenda. I think a lot of composers would say that about their music. But in my case, if I can subtly influence people's consciousness about the planet on which we tromp around and make a conductor and an ensemble my willing co-conspirators, that's great. So my realization of the potential for connecting my band pieces with initiatives began with Papercut, which was back in 2010. It was my first electroacoustic piece, or the first one, I guess, for middle school with wind band, and probably the first one to use printer paper as a percussion instrument. And I immediately saw the use of all this paper as an opportunity to send a message to students about environmental responsibility. So in the score front matter, I decided to say, with a nod to environmentalism, Papercut might even remind people to avoid waste and recycle. Players can collect paper that would have otherwise ended up in the trash, like old homework and junk mail, and bring it to rehearsals. And hey, it might even be therapeutic, as they can, take out their aggressions on their really bad grades and homework. And rehearsals also become an object lesson as band directors set up recycling cans and bins, and they've got students cleaning up the floor at the end of practice. I have seen this many times, and it's hilarious. So I'm going to play you a very quick excerpt just so you can see the visuals of the paper playing to get us started from this very visual piece in some black light. Kind of cool. A lot of paper, a lot of recycling, a lot of junk mail. Put it to good use. So this is also where I'm speaking to. This is what I'm looking at right in front of my camera, beyond the view of my computer here. I'm at the edge of the Salish Sea, and I am surrounded by nature and wildlife. There are many, many more animals and creatures here than there are people on little San Juan Island, Washington. 6,500 people here. And my wildlife photography has gotten a few awards, and sometimes I pair my music with it to connect people with the planet. I have found this to be a lot of fun. So long before a concert, the performance begins for me with interactive Webhearsal sessions and continues with the audio and the photos and the videos that I incorporate into the delivery webpage for the downloading of the score and the parts and the accompaniment tracks. And with these tools, I can instantly pull everybody else into a different world that sets the tone for the music they're about to delve into. Immersion is one such piece, and the third movement of it, which is called Beneath, it features a heart-wrenching song of a humpback whale. And I have found that this really does help musicians and audiences connect to the fragility of the sea and its creatures. And just for fun, I thought I'd play you a very short excerpt of that actual whale sound by itself that I cleaned up the sample, cleaned up some of the scratchiness, and used it in my piece. Here you go. I didn't have to pitch correct that whale at all. It was whale tempered, haha, and it worked for scale. But it was really amazing to come across that sample on the NOAA website and use it. So here is a very brief excerpt from Beneath, where you can hear how that whale song is used in the context of a full concert wind band, symphonic wind band. And this is what it looked like at Ted Mann Concert Hall in Minneapolis when Jerry Lucart conducted the University of Minnesota students in the premiere of the piece. This was back in 2011. And one of the also very, very touching moments I had with this piece early on was when Tom Duffy did it at Yale, and I call it a full circle moment because you can see in one of these pictures that the view from my window as I was composing the piece with the sea in front of me and some islands. And then you can see during a Skype rehearsal, as it was, the view from my window and you see Wolseley Hall in the background there. And then the most exciting thing was during the performance. I was 3 hours, I'm on the West Coast, so it was 4 o'clock my time, 7 o'clock at Yale in New Haven. And the audience got a live music video where I had them looking at the webcam out to the moving sea and the bald eagles and the whales going by as they're listening to the piece in live time. It was pretty amazing. So there's a great use of, multimedia, some activism, some thought about this planet. I want to turn this over now to two of my very favorite conductors. We're going to start with Rob, and he's going to chat with you about a concert that he did in late 2019. Before I start this, Rob, you want to say a few words?
Sure. First of all, greetings from beautiful BC, everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces. And Alex, thanks for having us today to talk a little bit about this. Our project, which was probably one of the most exciting creative projects I've ever got to do, was this last fall and entitled The Automatic Earth Concert for the Climate. And that project came out as part of a series of climate action events. Actually, the academic year began with faculty and students marching together in the Climate Strike parade in Vancouver. We made this sort of multicultural marching band with the gamelan and all kinds of other instruments. And that kind of set us in a particular direction for the year and served as kind of a thread throughout the year, which was really, really an engaging way to interact with the art we were making. The idea for our concert came from a few different threads. One is a collaboration with a very dear friend of mine, Mita Mahado, which you might see a short video clip of later, who is a comics poet in Seattle and who had been working in an area around climate and climate grief in her art. And so we wanted to do some work with her art. She created a poster and many other materials that were used as part of the performance. And at the core was this thread of electroacoustic music featuring music by both Alex Shapiro and by Stephen Bryant, composers that I've worked with and performed many, many times in the past. And so we wanted to create this sort of thread around multimedia and electroacoustic music that could maybe make commentary on this environmental issue. As the project took off, it grew and grew. So we made connections to the climate research that's happening at University of British Columbia. We made connections to community partners in climate action. And mostly with my students, we were exploring the role of what it means to be an artist in society, right? And the relative comfort, or more often discomfort, with arts activism. And what does that even mean? What are we communicating with our music? And that was such an incredible opportunity to delve into kind of that way of interacting with what we do. So I think, Alex, you have a brief kind of intro to Stephen's piece. So this is just a little bit of a trailer teaser video that we made for the concert, and we put out many others with multimedia, little excerpts from the rehearsals themselves. I should say, if anybody actually does Stephen's piece, that was about twice the written tempo, that passage right there. So we got it down to speed during his residency. But doing this, you can see the artwork here by Mita, was such an incredible way to interact with this music. we got to delve into some ideas around what it's like to make a musical commentary on environmental issues, especially on occupied lands. UBC is on occupied lands of the indigenous people of this area. And also questions about like, what's the carbon footprint of a concert? We're using all this power to power lights and multimedia, and we have these rare woods that are used for instruments and paper for programs and other things. So it really made us look at all of those things very creatively for the concert. So you can see the poster here, and then what's our next slide, Alex?
Just the program.
Okay. Yeah. So the program had 3 parts. The first one, the Ronald Searle Suite. Of course, this work kind of exploring early views on industrialization, on consumption, on energy, and this featured music of Lynn Murray for the soundtrack to Ronald Searle's cartoon that was made by Standard Oil, and I think it was 1957 or so. So we looked at this as to sort of show the early views on energy and consumption, which are way out of line with kind of current views. And we even had a narration that showed some of those views as a starting point. And then the second part featured our concert wins. In that part, we explored the relationship between the human, performers, and nature. So we had Stephen's Machine Awakes, Derek Chark's Song of the Tides, which is a work that uses recorded sounds of actual ocean sounds. And then, of course, Alex's Moment, where all of the students put up pictures of them in nature, interacting with nature. And the third part explored, first of all, McAllister's Gone, with the artwork from Mita Mahato's Extinction Limericks. And I'll put a link in the chat that you can go to if you want to see how those interacted with the music. And then finally with Stephen's work, The Automatic Earth, which was this central musical core of our program for the evening.
And it's a great piece. It's just a fantastic piece. For those of you who haven't heard it yet, check it out.
Yeah. This was, as I mentioned, this was probably one of the most deeply felt interactions and collaborations with my students in years. And I saw new sides of my students because we had a committee of students working on all of the elements of this program. They had research posters out in the lobby. We had climate action groups out there signing people up and taking donations. We had Indigenous youth who had written poetry on climate grief that were there. It was such a community event in so many ways that it just really came to life. And after the program, Stephen was in residence, and after the program, we made space in the lobby for dialogue between the performers, the composer, and everybody that was there. And I just can't tell you what a wonderful event it was.
Yeah. Would you like to hear from Mita, what she had to say?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. See if I can get the computer to behave once again. There we go.
The artwork that I created for Automatic Earth Concert for the Climate features local killer whales, the orcas. I put them in more of a surreal landscape because I wanted to capture their plight in a more surreal fashion. So we can kind of think about climate crisis in a way that we're not used to, but to also make it something that is close to home.
And here's Janelle Julian talking about her experience with this.
I feel as though climate change is definitely something really scary, especially as someone who's a young person and feels like you don't have much power. People tell us all the time that what we do doesn't have direct impact in our world. So when I got the news that, I could be a part of something like this, I definitely took the chance. I'm really excited for the Automatic Earth concert because I feel as though as artists, we should be engaged in these kinds of topics, and I feel like kids these days do care, and it's very very uplifting to know that.
And one more video.
I mean, my generation grew up listening to the dangers of what could happen 30 years from now, and a few years past, it's 20 years from now, and then 10 years from now. And now we're talking about like an 18-month window. What can you do to be a part of solutions to the problems? The question I pose myself. The repertoire shows several different views on climate change, on how we've been involved in it, how we cause it, what has been done, what can we change. We're going to have extreme lighting effects. We're going to have very out-of-the-box sounds. We're going to have, it's going to push to the limit of what a symphonic ensemble can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see how powerfully the students speak about this music and their interaction with it. And Stephen created such a wonderful work for us to use as a core that allowed us, because the work was so powerful musically, allowed us to explore these ideas in very, very deep ways.
Yep. And here you can see an example from the hall of videos and QR codes that were connecting everybody during the performance, you know. There's done, a lot of people do this now in their concerts, and it's fantastic because you can get auxiliary information at the same time that you're experiencing the work and the
Yeah,
concert.
and we use, as you can see, we use video mapping to put images all around the auditorium, not just on a flat screen, but on the stage and around, and surround everybody with it. And again, just thinking outside of the box creatively to kind of create a thread through the whole program using that multimedia to kind of bring the audience into the piece. We didn't use stand lights. We designed the whole show in a way where the multimedia and the technology would be more seamless, if you will.
That's right. By the way, I know a number of people are saying that the video clips were a little soft, so the next video clips I'll try to adjust the volume if I can on my end. That wacky internet. So, Stephen, before I talk a little bit about Moment, and then Gerard's going to speak about both of our pieces again and his concert. But Stephen, is there anything you wanted to toss in before we keep going?
I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, sure. I just want to say that it was an extraordinary experience with Rob and the group, and hearing how the music, the entire concert connected with the students and how passionate they were. Really, I don't know why, but it surprised me that my music could have that much of an effect and really inspire them. So, and Rob, you went all out on that concert. It was really extraordinary. So that's all.
Great. So one of the pieces on both of these concerts was My Moment, which after I spent a lot of time in Belize, and I was just appalled. And if any of you have been down there to the Caribbean in general, but particularly that side of the Caribbean, you'll see all this plastic, just tons and tons, feet of plastic up on the beaches. And I couldn't stop thinking about the harm that humans are doing to the planet. So I often encourage students or bands in general, when they do this piece, to find their own images that are going to reflect what they feel about the planet, good or bad. It could be moments that are just striking in your life, which is sort of what I had put up for my own photos on the delivery page. And when Rob did it, certainly you can see an example here. This is what it looked like up on his stage with some of his students. So Gerard, amazingly, Gerard and Rob's concerts happened to be very close to each other, and it was quite exciting because it almost felt like there was a movement afoot, which, I mean, in general there is, but it felt like this great Pacific Northwest kind of, environmental movement. So I'll let Gerard speak about his approach to this.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks again, Josh, for organizing these summer lectures. And thank you, Alex, for including Rob and I in this presentation today. And Stephen, thank you so much for joining us from Austria. So my concert, you can see the poster here for it. It's a little hard to read, but This Day, Our Environment, this was part of a series. And so just so to give you a little context of how I typically think and how I like to program. But the whole year had a trajectory to it. And we started in the fall with this day, presence and awareness, which had to do about going internally. And then we had this day, our environment, which was our second concert, which obviously dealt with climate change and our environment and what we're doing to it. The third concert in this series was called This Day, Friendship and Mentorship, which was going to be our concert at the CBDNA divisional conference that we were hosting. And then the final concert was titled This Day, Social Justice. So ironically enough, that's a very, it's really important to be talking about that right now as well. So during the course of the year, it engaged students, various departments, our entire community to come together around all of these different facets of our day, of our lives. So specifically here with this concert, the program was divided into two parts. And I selected music that on the first half of the concert would help people reflect and bring them into our current world and think about what they have around them, what they love, what they enjoy. And then the second half was focused on Stephen's work, The Automatic Earth, which is really a response of frustration. And Stephen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but anger toward what we're not doing to save the planet. And so it's a very, very powerful piece of music. And then bringing it back around, for those of you that know Stephen's work, I don't want to give the ending away, but if you don't know it, well, you should. But it ends in a way that kind of, it sucks the air out of the hall completely. And it leaves everybody in the space thinking what just happened. And it's quite a moment, and it builds to this moment. So we sat in that silence for a few seconds, and then we came out of it but it doesn't have to be this way. We have a choice, and we can make it better. The connective tissue in this performance was the fact that we had students in our creative writing department that were focusing on environmental issues. So we featured their poems between pieces of music. So students from the creative writing department came on stage and read their original poems that they wrote about the environment between the works. In that silence after The Automatic Earth was a poem titled Song of the Sprout, which Alex has here on the screen for us. And it was this beautiful poem written by one of the students. And in the darkness to hear these words, and then we, from that darkness, we had the Make Our Garden Grow from Candide as a metaphor for, in the operetta, it's for the love two people have for one another and how they have everything they need right in front of them. And then for us, this was our planet. It was the relationship with our planet, and using that song as a metaphor for making our planet grow and taking care of our environment. We worked together with a number of different local organizations. 350 Tacoma was the one we worked most closely with. And they curated the lobby and the hallways of the lobby with various posters. We had students from the environmental studies area come in with their own personal projects that we had poster presentations that were hanging, so people could interact with different writing, videos. We had stations set up with videos with from different activists that were speaking that we could share with the concert goers. So it was really quite an experience. I think the value of doing these types of projects is, yes, we have a message that we're trying to get across, and we want all the students to be involved in that, but we also were trying to help our audiences grow and learn as well, and give them some resources to turn to. So that was pretty much the gist of my whole program. It was incredible, and you can see here the first half we had students basically submit photos of things that they enjoyed in nature for parts of this. And we showed these video presentations during these pieces. Mother Earth was really about pictures of the earth and the things that we love about the earth. In Stephen Bryant's Dusk, students shared some of their favorite places in nature and on the planet. During Moment, we asked Alex if we could use her, some of her beautiful photography to showcase that piece and how we're destroying and not protecting our planet. And you saw some of those pictures earlier in this presentation. And Chasing Sunlight by Kate Nishimura kind of brought things back around where we have to start thinking and protect this planet and before we lose it. And then of course the second half here was our premiere of Stephen's piece, which was incredibly powerful. And then with the poems interspersed between all of the pieces. So that's pretty much the gist of it for me. It was incredible though. It involved, this is a picture here of the Tacoma Climate Strike. And we had a lot of students that participated in that event downtown based on the work that we were doing. And it was really cool to see colleagues from the environmental studies program come over and be involved in this, also from our creative writing department. The students within the ensemble, there were over 150 people involved in the production of this concert as well as the performance. So it really brought a lot of different constituencies together to really be thinking about what we're doing. There was a lot of gratitude from the Puyallup tribe, which our land that we teach and learn on is part of the Puyallup Nation. And so we had invited them to be part of this program as well. And we thanked and shared our thanks for the land that we're able to live and work on. So.
Yeah. Both concerts were remarkable. I wasn't able to be there in person, but I watched them online and, it was incredible. So, amazing. So here's just to wrap up some of this before we get to some Q&A. Another one of my pieces that's very environmental is called Rock Music. And come on, computer, get with the program here. There we go. This is my former studio where I was literally right on the rocks, same island. There's a fox and my cat, Bella, next to me. There's a piece of driftwood that looks remarkably like a sound wave. And, in rock music, this was a grade 2.5 piece for, but it's done by community bands too, that is very minimalistic. And I wanted to basically get students to go outside and connect with the planet that they're on. So I decided to not only have rocks in the soundtrack, but to actually have them playing rocks that they found in the, during the piece itself. And I asked them to record the rocks, go outside, make recordings of their rocks. Some of them made videos too. Send me all those recordings. So I had like 106 MP3s coming at me that I cleaned up, and I used those in my track as well. It was really, really fun. And I divided up the rhythmic sounds and the ones with pitches. You had no idea how many pitches rocks have. They tend toward A flat though, I will say this. And I used most of these as the basis, for that accompaniment track. And I then created this sort of A flat drone. And the musicians were playing the rocks in a live performance as well as their instruments. And here we have the world's first piece with no melody, no rhythm, a lot of rocks for band. I love band because you can do anything. As I love to say, I get paid to mess with people. That's my motto. And so as I composed, it was band director Chris Gleason's idea. You might know him, a lot of you know him, to invite a geologist in from the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey to give a talk to the band students. And these are, 7th and 8th graders. And he was showing them, the geology of where they lived and where I live and what everything was like at our last ice age 15,000 years ago. The students made video reports, and Chris put the clips together, and the delivery page includes a whole lot of this. And again, it's another very holistic approach to doing band music, but connecting that music to the rest of the world. So, and then finally, one of the students, her name was Alexandra. I remember this. She was 13. She made this amazing slideshow that accompanied the piece. And just to give you a little sense of what it sounds like, here's a very brief MP3. and a little video which we'll skip over in the name of time. But you can see 13-year-olds have no problems being still and playing. So I'll just skip right through that. They are very sobered by this material, and it's heartwarming to reach them on these levels, you know, the stewards of our world. So what really compels me about this particular experience is that not only does the piece offer audiences a multidimensional performance, but Chris wisely blurred those lines for his students, combining the music program and the science program in real life, just like Gerard and Rob have been doing. And to me, this is one of the most significant things that we as composers and conductors and educators can do to ensure that the music world we love continues to thrive. So one last very quick example of social awareness, where I had a commission for my very first electroacoustic choral work last year. And I chose a text by the doomed Anne Boleyn, written as she awaited her beheading in the Tower of London. And I think we all know that sad, sad story. And the project offered me the chance to use Anne's plight to raise awareness of how now, 484 years later, after her beheading, at the hands of a brutal man and a brutal government, not nearly enough has changed. I drew an uneasy connection between the past and the present, and I spoke to the audience about how women unlucky enough to live in this present day in countries that enforce the harshest interpretations of Sharia law and penal codes, how they're being stoned and beaten and lashed and burned and, yes, beheaded to this day. So a piece of music can't necessarily alter the plight of the abused, but it can move the rest of us to raise these issues up to the light and listen and speak up. Here's the end of "Oh Death, Rock Me Asleep" from the live premiere in Beverly Hills last year. Encourage our students to be curious about the world around them and to learn more about the events that interest them, and then to contribute their own voices. Music making is a tribal and social activity that involves interdependence and being an active community member. And we want to teach volunteerism and activism, and we can do that by modeling it. So last card here, lots of resources. If you go to my website, one of the very first links you can see is a link to this, the programming resources page that I've aggregated over the past few years, which has a ton of links for programming options for all kinds of interesting and diverse voices in our band world and beyond. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and come back. So thank you guys all for joining us on this. Let's open up the conversation.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that really wonderful presentation, Alex, and everyone. If you do have any questions you would like to ask, feel free to place them in the chat window. I'll leave just a little bit of time for that. Looks
and
like
Steve is still with us, so yeah. While he's still awake, I want to give him the floor to see if there's more he'd like to say while we wait for questions to roll in, if there are any. Oh, you're muted, Steve.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Sorry, I don't know how to use computers. Yeah, I didn't realize I was actually going to speak on this, but just to reiterate everything you said, I agree completely. You as always, nailed everything, Alex. So I just wanted to say a little bit about the Automatic Earth because it is a pretty angry piece, and not my usual mode of musical output, at least not for not such a sustained thing. But it's not. I didn't want to create a problem play. I've never seen myself as an activist, and not in the way of like overtly through like beating people over the head with something. And this piece sort of does that. But it's not in the sense of, hey, everything's horrible and we have to do something about it. Because I don't think that really reaches people. It's more of me reckoning with the realization of how dangerously close we are to destroying a habitable planet for all of us. It's an impending catastrophe. Well, I don't think impending is even strong enough. And so it's that sort of piece reckoning with that. It's probably uncomfortable for a lot of people, and that's sort of the point. So if anybody has any questions about it or has experienced it live and has any questions about it, I'd welcome them.
Well, I've got a question for you, Steve, because I remember talking to Rob and Gerard as they were putting it together, but especially a conversation I had with Rob where he was talking about the multimedia visual effects, the lighting especially, that you had indicated to bring the point home, including some very bright sudden lights and things like that. Talk a little bit about how you incorporated, the lighting aspect into your piece.
Sure. So this is the first time I did this on any scale like this, and that actually was triggered by Gary Hill, who led the commission consortium for it. And he asked me specifically, write a piece, one that makes us uncomfortable, and two, incorporates, let's throw everything at it. So I went down that path. That's what spurred me to. I'd never really done it before. The CBDNA premiere, we didn't have enough rehearsal time. He pulled off a miracle with that, but not everything worked exactly right. But when we did it with Rob, because Rob invested like 300 million hours into the piece and all of the elements of it, it came off beautifully. It was extraordinary, and it's exactly how I envisioned it. But I learned a lot in doing it. I mean, you've done a little bit more of that, but it's amazing how powerful that is, and especially the big, simple things. And that moment you're talking about when I call for blinders, like rock concert blinders. If you can rent those, if you do the piece, that's what I want. It just to shine the light directly on the audience and put them on the spot, literally, and kind of pull them in. That was the first moment I thought of 2 years before the piece. And it directly quotes Ecstatic Waters, another piece of mine from 10 years ago. And that's on purpose too. I don't need to go down that path about all of that. This will take way too long. But that moment was the core of the piece, and it's the first thing I came up with, and everything else built around that.
So we've had a question come in regarding where's the line in adding visual elements into musical experiences. The question specifically, have you ever had an experience where you feel like you may have incorporated too many visual elements that had detracted from the music? And where do you believe the line is?
I don't think there's a line. I think it's just like the music itself. It's personal preference. Every piece is different. I have one very, very visual piece called Lights Out, which is the polar opposite side of the spectrum of Automatic Earth, in that it's a goofy, silly, up-tempo, almost dance piece. It's just a groove piece. And it's filled, you play it in the dark. There are LEDs shoved up of everybody's instruments. There's kicking of the seat backs while bass drums and the track roar to make the audience have a surround sound, kind of experience. I go purposely over the top with it, and so far so good. I mean, I think ultimately the music, if from the composer's standpoint, if the composer is designing a piece of music, as Steve did with his and I did with Lights Out, where the visuals are very much an inherent part of it from the ground up, then they're taking the music into account with that. So it is hopefully well choreographed and well balanced. I think it's possible, sure, for somebody to grab a totally, kind of I don't know, sober piece of music and go all out with visuals that can be overwhelming to the meaning of the music, sure, but that probably wouldn't come from the composer. And I think I've never seen a conductor not, in my experience, not, not be sensitive to that. Stephen, do you have a thought about this question?
As usual, everything you just said, when it's created from the ground up with that in mind, and a sense of how much stimulation from which senses are coming and balancing all that. I mean, that's what we spend a lot of our time doing, is balancing. That's what we do. We shape your experience of time as a listener. And so all of those elements are harnessed, hopefully in a balance that does that. Yeah, if you just glom on a bunch of strobe lights to some Beethoven, that may not work as well.
Tacky. I mean, the thing I remember starting, well, Papercut, it was my first experience really with a multimedia visual approach to music, and I spent a lot of time choreographing the paper moves and all that. It took almost as much time to choreograph the visuals of the paper as it did to write the damn piece, seriously. But you have to put a lot of thought into these things. And what I've noticed just over time is that on any piece, any concert, the minute one person lights up one tiny little flashlight, the audience goes, ooh. Audiences are just a little starved for the kind of multimedia and on the stage that they see every single day on their phones and on their screens, right? So to be able to cross that gap and bring what has become the daily experience for people to the concert stage is of great interest to composers like us, because you're connecting the dots, especially to audiences that are not necessarily in the music world, But as Steve said, you wouldn't want to go overboard and do a tacky job of it with the wrong kind of piece. But the composers, we enjoy stretching the boundaries. I mean, it's that's our job, is to push. Sometimes we might get it wrong, but our job is to push, So.
Just to add to that just a little bit, because in our concert we had some works that weren't designed from the ground up to have a visual element, and so it was really interesting to deal with the different pieces on the same program, and we purposely made certain aspects of the program very muted by comparison, so that these, there was nothing really bright until we had Stephen's moment that needed to be the brightest thing anybody's ever seen in their life. And so I think that's really important, and you need time and the space to really try things. It took hundreds of hours to try things and get a sense of what the flow was and really get it right. And it came up right to the dress rehearsal before we felt that we had the technology done right. And that was in contrast to Gone by McAllister, where I wrote to him and I said, we'd like to do this. We'd like to add this visual element, these haunting comics poems by Mita Mahato. And how do you feel about that? It's still about grief, but it's a different kind of grief than the piece is about. And he was so kind to open up a space for us to try it, and was very, very happy with it. So there is something also that you could get from maybe interacting with a composer in that way, to see how they feel about bringing that different element to the music.
That's right.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick. I'll only take 2 seconds here. Tiffany, thank you so much for the question. It's curation. So from a standpoint of what like Alex and Stephen have said, they think about it maybe in terms of a composition, but then as conductors, we take these compositions and then we put them together in a program, and it's how we choose to curate it. What kind of journey are we taking the audience on? What kind of journey are we taking our students on? So the answer to your question is, it depends on what you think. Like, what are you looking for the ultimate experience for your students and for the audience? And then you just put all those things together. I would just add that, as Coco Chanel always said, before you leave the house, always take one thing off. So when you think it's perfect, look at it again, and then think, maybe I should take that one other thing out. Thank you.
It's so true. I love that. I love that quote. Gosh. I know that we've got a couple of questions I just saw in the chat. I'm helping Josh out here. Can you reassure non-tech people into diving into this style of music? And what are your best what went wrong stories? We could be here all day probably with all of this stuff. But in short, well, Steve and I are a good pair. We didn't expect Steve to really be part of this panel, and I'm so glad that he's here. This is awesome that he's staying awake in Austria, where it's very late. But the setup is pretty easy. If you've got a laptop, if you've got earbuds. If you really don't have any budget for a little, $100 interface, you can get a $20 pair of USB headphones and plug them in and use what's called a multi-channel file to route the earbuds so that you've got the click in your ear as a conductor and the track, and that all the audience hears is the track. Usually we do it through something called an audio interface. All of this stuff, both Steve and I have free PDFs that we offer up happily on our websites and in every delivery to handhold and make sure everybody has an easy time with this, because it is a simple setup. My stuff is pre-recorded, set it and forget it. You just hit the file in Audacity and off it goes. Stephen usually or often uses Ableton Live, where he's got an extra musician triggering entrances of cues from of the track throughout the piece, on cue from the conductor. Stephen, do you want to add to that?
Just as usual, you're on point. You and I both
I paid
go.
him to say this.
I'm looking for that check in euros. We both go to extraordinary lengths to package this up in a way and explain it for people who don't know what an interface is or what this technology is. And as always, I like to joke, I provide free tech support. I wish I'd thought about that when I first wrote Ecstatic Waters 10 years ago, but that would be the rest of my life. Given the number of performances I've seen and how everybody seems to manage to do it just fine, even if they don't know TRS versus XLR versus any of that stuff, it's not that complicated. You just need to spend a couple of extra hours reading beforehand with making sure everything plugged in, make sure it works, and then off you go. Because you and I both go to extraordinary lengths to make sure that it doesn't detract from rehearsal time. That is very important to me.
Exactly. And speaking of detracting, another thing just to put people at ease, for those of you who have not conducted with a click track in your ear, because most of these pieces have them, it doesn't have to be as rigid as it sounds. You can give up some time, but you just have to make it up at some other point. So the more comfortable you are with the piece and knowing the track, the more free you will feel, and it's almost like you're not hearing the click quite so much. It's just keeping you honest and making sure, as I always say, that it doesn't turn into a sporting event where people are placing bets on which is going to get to the finish line first, the band or the track, If we had more time, we could talk about some of our funny stories from this, but I think that might be a whole nother panel in and of itself.
Well, before we wrap up, we'll go ahead and there's one, small part of this last question that we have that I think would maybe be a good way for us to end on. And it's what inspired each of you, and I guess, Stephen, you are included in this as well, to begin writing for music with multimedia?
For me, I came from a commercial music background. For many, many years, I was scoring film and TV and commercial projects in Los Angeles. And so I always had a studio. And when I flipped my career over to my real love of concert music, this is about 22 years ago now, not too long after that, a violinist had asked me, hey, would I do an electroacoustic piece for her? Just a solo violin thing. And actually, she was an electric violinist. And I said, sure, I might as well put all this to use, because at this point I was writing piano trios and string quartets. And I started to just love it. And then when I got my first band commission, many years later, in my late 40s, I got my first commission from the US Army, which was not an electroacoustic piece. That was just exploring the world of band in a piece called Homecoming, which is acoustic. But right after that, Papercut and Immersion came. And that's when it dawned on me, the light bulb went up in my head as I sat here thinking, if it's so much fun to do this with one soloist and a track, what would it sound like with a whole lot of people up on the stage? And I thought it could be a total disaster. I wasn't aware of Steve and his pieces at that point, because he had done Ecstatic Waters before this, but he wasn't on my radar at all, because I wasn't a band chick at the time. So I discovered it through doing it an awful lot my whole life, working with electronics and just loving it, and then adding the lighting and the physical movement. Steve?
Yeah, I was interested in electronic music as early as I was in acoustic music. In high school, I got my synthesizer, my Yamaha V50 4-operator FM synth on October 16th, 1989. Not that I remember that clearly. And I was, writing cheesy new age stuff and all of that. And it was not a separate activity than writing a brass quartet or my first band piece for my high school band, which hopefully none of you will ever hear. And so from the very beginning, I wanted to incorporate the two, and it just took a long time before I felt like the technology got to where I could pull it off in the way I wanted to. And then I had the opportunity with players and the conductor who want to take the chance on me to do that. But it was always there. These are not separate worlds for me. And I think for a lot of us, this generation and younger, it's just natural.
And it's a great way to relate to younger students as well with music, as we're writing serious pieces, very serious works sometimes, not always. Some of my pieces are really silly, some of Stephen's are, but we also have these serious works, and yet you can take that seriousness and make it even that much more accessible and in reach to the emotions of younger people when you're using tools that they themselves use. I mean, one of the things I love to do when I'm talking to students is, they got GarageBand. A lot of them do Audacity and GarageBand and other stuff like that and Reaper, and, to show them this and say, hey, and to show them a phone and to say, if you've got one of these, you can compose. And one of our great joys is getting young people to compose and improvise and all that. So the tools are present for all of them doing that, and then composers who do EA music model that and show them what's possible as we learn what's possible, because we're always pushing these boundaries and learning ourselves constantly because the tech keeps changing.
Wonderful.
And I might add, I just have to add that it's because of band directors like Rob and like Gerard and like so many people here and so many other people that we know who embrace us as composers and give us the voice and the audiences and the opportunity to spread our wings and try things out and take risks. Because of you guys, this is how we thrive. So it is completely a connected experience, and I do speak for Steve when I express great gratitude and appreciation for your adventurousness and support.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so very much to all of you, Alex, Rob, Gerard, Stephen, for presenting today's topic, and to the leadership of CBDNA and Dr. Mark Speed, president of CBDNA, who I believe is here, for their support of this initiative. I'm sure I speak for all of us in attendance when I congratulate all of you on such a wonderfully educational and creative presentation. I know that I've already got some ideas for my ensembles for the fall. CBDNA's next webinar will take place 1 week from today on July the 2nd at 4 p.m. Central Time, and will focus on the wind music of Ida Gotkovsky. I think I said that right. I tried really hard to find a phonetic pronunciation online. Our presenter is Dr. David Wasik from St. Martin's University in Lacey, Washington. The session will stream on CBDNA's Facebook page. No Zoom login credentials will be needed, and questions and comments will be taken live during the webinar while it's being aired on social media. Again, thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you for the next one. Have a great rest of your day.